I've been going through Colossians, and as we're going through this part right now, there's a thing that this section makes me think about. And I don't know about you, but I've had a lot of jobs in my life. I started working at 13. I've had a job since I was 13. That's when I started working. And I've been a car wash chemical salesman. I have repoed houses. That was a fun one. I have worked at an e-tailer for a while. I've done all kinds of stuff. But the hardest, most physically demanding, and the dirtiest job that I've done is working at church camp. And that was my first job. Worked there for 4 summers. And it's hard. It's difficult because, first of all, the hours, right? We have to be up and have breakfast done so that everybody else can eat breakfast. So we're up. The cooks are doing their thing, but we're up 6, got to get everything ready and do that. And then we would go until the campers got done. And generally, somewhere around the time they quit, we would be done. So 10 o'clock, depending on if it's teen camp, it might be 11 o'clock. And so it's, 6:30 to 10:30 every day with some breaks in between. And it was just physically demanding to stay up all that time, but then you're cleaning up after 500 people, 600 people who are teenagers mostly, don't do a good job cleaning up after themselves, and then there's all the maintenance. But the thing that made it bad is not even the hours, it's not the manual labor of it all, it's the grossness of the job, right? So the worst job in the kitchen was the sprayer, because you've got 500 people eating 3 times a day, and you're spraying all their food off into a sink. And if you've washed dishes, you know that sometimes stuff builds up. Now I want you to just take 500 people. And so there comes a point where you're just over it, and you reach down and you grab handfuls of soggy food. Kathleen, you okay? You grab handfuls of soggy food and you're throwing it away. And there wasn't a job in the kitchen that wasn't gross, but that was definitely the worst one. We would have to clean up the bathrooms at the end of the week. And so you've got dorms where people have been living together, teenagers, kids, and you got to clean that up. But I got to tell you, as gross as boys are on the day-to-day, in the long term, girls are way worse. I don't understand why. I don't understand what y'all are doing over there, but it's gross. Give me 3 boys' bathrooms over 1 girl's bathrooms when it comes to a week-long stay, every time. But the grossest job was dealing with the trash. We had these big 55-gallon drums. I don't even know where we got trash bags that big, but we had these 55-gallon drums, and we would get trash, and you'd have to take them out 2 or 3 times a week. And we would go get these, and some of them you could get 2 guys together and you could pick them and dump them. But for a lot of them, it was you're going to have to take the sack out and throw it over your shoulder and go. Especially when I started this at 13, when I was doing this at 14, and it's big trash bags and it's heavy. And so you got this big trash bag, and there's bees everywhere, by the way. And you pull the trash bag out and you tie it up, and you have to throw it over your shoulder to get wherever you're going. And these were big trash bags, but they were not leak-proof. So you got this trash, and I can feel trash juice that's been baking in the sun for the week, going down my collar, going down my back, going into my underwear, down my pants, into my socks and shoes. I can feel the trash juice right now. It's nasty. And to this day, I don't have a lot of pet peeves that I'll call you out on. But if I see you throw a drink in the trash can, we're going to talk. We're going to talk. And the only good thing about taking out the trash was that the assumption was that you were going to be gross. You're going to have trash juice all over you. That's the assumption. And so the girls didn't have to take out the trash. The guys did. But the benefit that we got is while they got the less gross jobs, they had to keep working. And part of our job was to go take a shower now. So we'd go take a shower. There's 3 steps to cleaning up from trash juice. First step is to take the old clothes off because they're gross. Second step is to take a shower with soap. It helps. The third task is to put new clothes on. If you skip any of those 3 steps, you have accomplished nothing. Because if you keep the old clothes on, get in the shower, that obviously doesn't make any sense. You keep the old clothes on and put new clothes on top of it, that doesn't make any sense. You take the old clothes off, take a shower, don't put anything else on, you're just naked at work. And that's especially troubling at a church camp. You can't do that. And Paul has been talking about sin, and he talks about it like it's trash juice. He said, you think that it's just the way people are, it's just the way this works, but no, your clothes are filthy. And you need 3 steps. You need to remove the old clothes. You need to, not in this order, because Paul didn't consider my metaphor when he was writing this down, but you need to take off the old clothes. You need to be cleansed. You need to put on new clothes. Now that cleansing doesn't come from us. It comes from Jesus. When we recognize that we are sinners, that we cannot do anything to make ourselves clean, we need something else to step in and make us clean, and Jesus is the only one to do that. Whenever we cry out to him and say, look, I'm filthy, and I can't get clean without you, Jesus steps in and cleanses us. That's how the Bible talks about that, is that we are cleansed by that. But Paul says, okay, you've received that cleansing, but you keep putting on your trash juice clothes. And what does that do? For someone who is clean to continue to wear dirty clothes. The metaphor breaks down again. You don't lose your salvation by getting dirty again, but it makes you look like a fool to be clean, but to keep on the old clothes. And that's the previous 2 weeks that we've talked about. But then comes the next step, and that's to put on something else, to put on something new. And we generally lean one of 2 directions. We are either people who want to take out the sin from our lives, or we're people who want to add in righteousness to our lives. But rarely are we people who want to do both. We're just people that want to scorch the earth so that nothing else grows and we just chill. Or we're people who say, I really like doing what I've been doing. It's really hard to quit doing that, so I'm just going to add in more good things on top of it. But the process doesn't work if you skip steps. And Paul calls us to take off the old clothes and to put on something new. Now we are in Colossians chapter 3, and I just want to start where he starts here, in Colossians chapter 3, verse 12, where he starts with this part of it. He says this, put on then, as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience, bearing with one another, and if one has a complaint against another, forgiving each other, as the Lord has forgiven you, so you must also forgive. And above all these, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. Go back to verse 12, Cooper. Go back, pull that up on the screen. And I want to just point out something about this, is the active intentionality of the instructions that he's giving. He says, you have to decide how you're going to be. He talked about that when he said take off, put to death, when we were removing things. But he says now put on. And I think this is what we understand. Like, I've got to choose to stop that behavior. I've got to choose not to be like that. That makes sense. But for a lot of us, we don't think about putting on new things. We just ride with however we are. Like, you see somebody that's exceptionally kind or loving, you look at that person and say, man, I wish I was like that. It's never, man, I should try to be like that. It's, I wish I was like that. We look at other people and we just assume that's the way they are, so that's the way they are. We are the way we are. We try not to do bad things. But Paul is saying, no, I'm not calling you to just allow your natural abilities or your natural inclinations to shine. That's staying naked, right? It's just you are how you are. He said, I'm calling you to dress yourself in the things of God. And that means making a choice. How am I going to react in this situation? How am I going to treat these people? What attitudes am I going to cultivate in myself? Not just riding with however I happen to be, but choosing how I'm going to be. Last week we talked about people who just say, well, that's just how I am. That's just how I am. And how that's not an excuse, because if you are a child of God, if you trusted in Jesus, you are not who you were, you are who you are now. And we don't get to keep leaning on that way, on those things. And in the same way, if you're struggling with some of these things that Paul is going to tell you to do, you don't get a pass because it's not your gifting. I had a lady say that to me one time. We were talking about evangelism and sharing the gospel, and she said, well, I'm just not going to do that because it's not my gifting. My gifting is in service. My gifting, I'm like, oh, I mean, I appreciate her being honest. A lot of people feel that way. They just won't say it. Enough sense for that. But she said it out loud, like, okay, this is good. This is not my gifting. It's not what I'm good at. Not everything is your gifting, but that doesn't mean it's not your responsibility. Just because you're not good at it doesn't mean it's not your job. It's not something you're supposed to do. And so he says, I want you to choose, make a choice. Don't just rest on what you're good at, but instead choose to do these things. And he lists off these things, and I promise we're getting real close to the end of his lists. He likes lists, but we're getting close to the end of this. But he says, he gives us, I think it's 7 things that he gives us here. I've got it written down. I just don't remember the number. He's got 7 things listed here, and they all come in pairs except for the last one. And the reason they come in pairs is because first he describes an attitude, and then he describes the action that comes from that attitude. He says, what you need to do is you need to do the things that are different, but you also need to foster and develop within yourself attitude changes about things. The first thing he tells us is that we should put on compassionate hearts and kindness. Compassionate hearts and kindness. Dennis, you got your King James out there. What does it say instead of compassionate hearts in your Bible? I like it better. What does it say? Instead of, he wasn't listening. Verse 12, it says compassionate hearts. What does your Bible say? I know the answer. I just thought you'd already have it. Bowels of mercy. I like that better. Bowels of mercy. That's a fun one, isn't it? Bowels of mercy. See, when they thought about, we think about emotions and they're in the heart. That's where we think about them. They're not. That's just how we think about them, in the heart. When they talked about emotions, then the seat of emotions, they talked about them being in the gut, which makes more sense, right? If you are anxious, where do you feel it? In your heart? No, you feel it right here. Feel it in your gut. When you get butterflies, because she's so pretty, where do you feel it? Right here in the gut. They felt all their emotions in the gut. And so they described them as being in the gut. He said, I want you to feel mercy, compassionate hearts. He said, I want you to develop the feeling of mercy towards other people. That it's not just a decision you make sometimes, but that you develop to the point that your first response is mercy. That your first response is compassion. Some of you may be first responders in compassion. I'm not. It takes me a minute sometimes to get there. It's not always my first response. The first response he wants from us when we see someone is not, I can't believe they did that. But what was it that made them do that? It's not, I don't even want to be around that person, but I'm going to have to do some work to be around that person. He says, I want you to have compassionate hearts. Now, when somebody tells me to have a feeling, I start to tune out a little bit. Joey got all the emotions in the family. I didn't get any, so it's a struggle for me to feel things and to have emotions. But when we look at this, we say, okay, we're supposed to feel compassionate, have bowels of mercy, as Dennis likes to say. We want to have compassion as our first response. How do I feel a certain way, Paul? How am I supposed to make myself feel a certain way if I don't already feel that way? What am I supposed to do? Well, that is why there is an action attached to us. Because the action will produce the emotion over time. That if you build the habits of the action, the emotion that goes with it will come along. And some of you may be people that feel the emotion but don't do anything about it. And you're just like, because you're going to stay back, you're not going to get involved with anybody, you're going to stay out of the way, you don't want to offend anybody, and you don't do the things of kindness, but you feel the compassion. And whether you're someone who feels compassion but does not have the natural inclination to be kind, or someone that does not feel it and has to choose to be kind, both go together. If you will do the action, the emotion will be produced. If you get in the habit of being kind, of making the choice to be kind, then eventually that will become who you are. It's just what happens. The emotion and the action go together, and Paul calls us to both. And I don't know which one you are. Maybe you have big old bowels of mercy, like you just feel it. If you do, it's time to step up and display that through kindness, through being the first one to go and step up beside them, the one that gives grace, the one that gives mercy, to step up and do that. And if you don't feel the emotion, you're like me, you don't feel the emotion, you have to make a choice to demonstrate kindness to people, to treat them as you would want to be treated, whether you feel like doing it or not. You're called both to the feeling and the action. And it's a choice. Well, I'm just not a compassionate person. Get over it and start. Like we're not saying, hey, just whatever you're good at, just keep doing that thing, bro. Just like keep killing it at that one thing and just ignore everything else. You are a child of God and you're called to look like your Father. Can you imagine? And this may actually be more apropos than I think it is. But let's say that you adopt some kids. Let's just do it. Terry and Andy adopted 3 kids, right? Adopting 3 kids out of rough situations, brothers and sisters. And not all of them grew up in that, but they all have the effects. They've all dealt with the impact of that rough situation. And they bring them into the new family. And they're going to have the personality traits, the habits, the tendencies, the impact of the sin of their families in their lives. But are Tara and Andy going to be content with them behaving like their old family? No, they're part of a new family. And this is how we act. This is how we behave. We're going to help you with the things that you can't do anything about because it's what everybody else did to you. We're going to get you the help that we can. But we're also going to call you to a different kind of behavior, a different level of behavior, a different attitude in dealing with things. Because you were part of that family, but now you're part of a new family. And it is not enough for us to say, well, that's how I am. That's how my dad is. That's how my grandpa is. That's how my grandma, that's how Aunt Sally, you don't know these people. I'm the nice one out of this. That is not enough to be how you were. Because you're part of a new family. So you develop the emotion by performing the action. You become compassionate by acting kind, by being kind towards people, making that choice. Humility and meekness are the same way. They're the emotion and the action. Humility is not being self-deprecating. It's not saying that, well, it's talking down to yourself. It's not pushing yourself down. Humility for a Christian is about seeing ourselves properly in comparison to Jesus. This is who he is. And if this is who he is, I might be down. I'm down here. Now, you compare me to everybody else, and I might be right here. I mean, I don't know how that'll work out. But you compare me to everybody else, and I feel differently. But if I compare myself to the one who had to die to save me, that gives me a proper perspective on myself. And what it does is it allows me to be meek. Now, meekness is not weakness. Meekness is controlled strength. Meekness is having the ability to do something and choosing not to for the sake of somebody else. It's saying, I could punch your face in for what you just did, but I choose not to. That's meekness. Let's take it away from that a little bit. And let's say this. Humility tells you not to fight for what you want, not to fight to have things your own way. Humility says, let's figure out what's best for everybody because Jesus has done what's best for me, so let's figure out what's best for everybody. But a lack of humility says, I'm going to get what's mine. So what does meekness look like? If the absence of meekness look like, if you're saying, I'm going to get what's mine, it's that you use your influence, you use your ability to step up and persuade people, or you even just use the fact that you're willing to say stuff that other people aren't going to say to get what you want. But meekness and humility says, Jesus did what was best for me, not what was best for him. I'm going to do what's best for everybody else, and I'm not going to use my personality. I'm not going to use my strength. I'm not going to use my influence just to get what I want. But instead, I'm going to use it for what's best for everybody. That you develop meekness by observing Jesus in comparison with yourself. It's really hard not to be humble when you're looking at who Jesus is and what he had to do to save you, who were so evil and so filthy that you were on your way to hell, that your sin had separated you from God so completely that the one who had no sin had to step down into the mud to die to rescue you. And you look at that and say, well, I'm still going to get what's mine. I'm still going to fight for what's mine. I might be less than Jesus, but I'm better. You can't look at the sacrifice of Jesus honestly, and continue to carry that pride that says, I'm going to get what's mine, and I don't care what everybody else gets. And then you have to make the choice. When you look at Jesus and you change that, you make the choice not to use all the resources available at your disposal to get what you want. Act as Jesus would act in the situation. What does everybody else need? How does this need to work for everyone? Sometimes you're using it and you're using that ability to step up and say things that nobody else is willing to say, or you're using that persuasiveness, or you're using that money, or you're using that strength or whatever to push people into the right decision for everybody else. But it's not doing it for your own benefit, but for the benefit of the people around you. Why would we do that? Because we're trying to look like our Father, who sent His Son to gain Him nothing but us, who gave up everything, not for His sake, but for ours. So why should I say, you know what, it's not about me, it's about us, it's about what we need, it's not about what I need. In your marriage, it's not about what you want, but it's about what the family needs. It's about what's right for them, that you sacrifice of yourself. You get to that point when you recognize that I don't want to be like my parents. I want to be like my Father. When you see the difference between the two and you make a choice to humble yourself and be meek. Along with humility and meekness, He puts patience. That it's not just you look at each other and you're humble and you're not just meek and choosing to do the right thing, but you are patient. He wraps that in right alongside of that. Patience is a part of meekness. Now you say, okay, I'm going to be patient through this circumstance. And patience is not what I do. What I do is I endure while complaining. That's what I do. That's not patience. That's not patience. Patience is literally translated long suffering, that you suffer through the situation without allowing it to change your attitude or the way that you handle it. It's long suffering. And when I think about patience, a lot of times I think about the cancer patient that's waiting on God to do something. That's what I'm thinking about. Or the job situation and you're waiting on something to change. But that's not what we're talking about in the whole stretch of this. This is not, because everything that he's talked about is in relating to one another. And this is what he says. He says that you're supposed to be humble, but with humble, that comes meekness, that's controlled strength, but also patience, bearing with one another, and if one has a complaint against another, forgiving each other. So he's making it real clear that this patience is not just patience in your circumstance. It's not just patience waiting for this situation to end, but it's patience in dealing with these people. It's patience in dealing with each other. That your humility should lead you to patience in dealing with each other as a church, or each other as a family, or each other as a community. That you continue through difficulty without allowing it to change your attitude, without allowing it to change your goal, that you continue with the same attitude. And that you bear with one another. That you keep going even though that person drives you a little nuts. That you keep going with a great attitude, even though that person is struggling to do the same. This is not a section on enduring through disease or circumstance or joblessness. This is a passage on enduring while having to deal with each other. Anybody ever insult you unintentionally, casually? Happens to me a lot. I don't know why. I don't know if I attract that, if God's working on that in me. I don't know what it is. And I had some really apt ones, but I didn't want to call anybody out in church, so I won't say those. But I was at Walmart, and I'm a self-checkout guy. I like to be in charge of the technology myself. I'm a self-checkout guy. But I went to Walmart, and I was like, this girl helped me find something, and she was a cashier. I don't know why she helped me, but she did. And then I was like, well, I'll check out with you here. So I'm going through, just trying to make conversation. This girl is probably 19, maybe 20, and it's hard for me to tell anymore. And I say, just making conversation. I'm like, so do people really use these like in-person checkouts with the self-checkouts? Do very many people use these? And she said, well, I'm not trying to be rude. All right? I'm not trying to be rude, but it is a particular group of people. And she said, it's older people. I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Like, I understand. Baby boomers don't like the technology, don't want to deal with the technology, like things the way they are. My dad's not a baby boomer. He's a Gen X, but he's always grumpy about the self-checkouts. I still don't fully understand why. But I get that. I was like, oh, yeah. I started to say, oh, yeah, I understand. And she said, older people, like 25 and up. Like, girl, you don't even know how to work a DVD player, and you're going to talk to me about being older? What are you doing? And this girl, and I realized, like, the more I think about it, the more I realize she said, I'm not trying to be rude. She was pointing it at me. And like her perspective, like that we would just agree that as an old person, I would struggle. This girl didn't mean anything at all by it. She's just dumb and ignorant. And she didn't mean anything at all by it. How do you react when someone insults you unintentionally? Are you long-suffering? Or do you never speak to that person again? One time she noticed my roots were growing out, and I have not spoken to her since. How do you respond to someone in this church who, without malice, or even with malice because they're having a bad day, insults you? Paul says, choose to bear with one another. Because as much as you're bearing with them today, they will be bearing with you tomorrow. Do we let the unintentional insult go? Do we let the unintentional slight go? Do we let the intentional insult or slight go? Well, my family wouldn't. Some people in my family would not hang on to that forever. Been in churches where people are still talking about what somebody did 20 years ago. But what will we choose to do? Will we choose to be humble enough to see ourselves in relationship with Jesus and what Jesus has done for us? Will we reserve our strength not to defend ourselves, not to step up and get even, but to do what's right for the entire group? Will we be patient with one another? To bear with one another. And when we have a complaint, forgive one another. Forgiveness is one of those words we use that I don't really think we understand what it means. Forgiveness means to no longer expect payment for what happened. It's not just, I'm not going to talk about it, I'm going to pretend it's okay. It's not just, I'm going to try not to be mad about it anymore. It's saying, this happened, they owe me, but I no longer expect payment, and we're going forward as if it's settled. That we, as Jesus forgave us, we forgive. As the Lord has forgiven you. Remember, the reason that we're able to be humble is because we're looking at Jesus and who He is in comparison to who we are. And we look at Him and what He has forgiven us, can we really hold on to the fact that some little child thinks I'm old? Are we going to hang on to that? Or are we going to say, as He has forgiven me, so do I forgive? As the Lord has forgiven you, so you must also forgive. And this is verse 14. This is the end. Above all these. Now, like you can think of above all these as in seniority, in priority over all these things. This is the one you do first. But since we're sticking with the clothing metaphor, it looks to me like what he's talking about is, okay, you're dressed in everything else. On top of all this, put on the trench coat of love that holds everything else in place. Now, love, and it doesn't have an action with it, but that's because the Bible never talks about love as just a feeling. The Bible always describes love as feelings that lead to actions. For God so loved the world that He gave His only Son. He loved, so He gave. That love is never an emotion on its own, but love always produces an action. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, the one that we always use for weddings, but is actually about churches getting along. Love is patient. Love is kind. You look through this list and you see all the same things that he's talking about here, that love has this action. He says, if you're struggling to be humble, if you're struggling to be patient, if you're struggling to be meek, if you're struggling to be kind, then choose to love them. And treat them the way that love requires you to treat them. Because if you will say, nuts, but I love you. Lane, I don't know why I was looking directly at you. I'm sorry, that was not intentional. I'll try to look at the wall or Destin or something next time. I don't know why you're doing this, but I love you and I'm going to respond to you based on that love and not based on this situation. What will happen is that you will be led into patience. You will be led into kindness. You will be led into mercy. You will be led into humility. That love is the thing that secures the rest. Choose to love and do the actions of love. I just want to ask you 3 questions. Have you showered? I heard that, Audra. Me too. I showered this morning. Have you been cleansed of the trash juice of your sin? Have you been cleansed? Because Jesus is offering to do what you cannot do for yourself. That is, that if you trust in Him, He will cleanse you of your sin. He will make you new. He will make you right with God, not on your own efforts, but by His. That He gives you the legal standing to be with God, having your punishment taken by Him. Have you accepted what He's offered? Because if not, then no amount of clothes changing will fix anything. If you are dirty and soaked in trash juice, it doesn't matter how clean the clothes are that you put on, you will remain dirty. If you've not showered, not allowed Jesus to wash all that mess off of you and make you right with Him, then none of the rest of this will do any good. You need to stop what you're doing and cry out to Him and make things right with Him. And He says that all those who call on the name of the Lord will be saved. So call out to Him. But if you've been cleansed by Jesus, but you've not taken off the dirty clothes, you didn't take off all that stuff that is who you used to be, that's soaked in the same sin that led Jesus to have to die for you, it's time to take that stuff off. Put it to death. Not by accident, not by osmosis, not because you just get better with time, but because you choose to be different than you were before. This process does not work if you skip steps. You're not called to do that. You are called to be cleansed, to take off the old and put off the new. And if you decide, I'm just going to take off and put on, I'm not going to do that showering in the middle, it doesn't do any good. If you choose to keep the old clothes on and put new clothes on top of them, you're just getting new clothes dirty. And if you choose to take off the old, to receive that cleansing, to take off the old, but to put on nothing new, you're just naked. Mark Twain said, clothes make the man. Naked people have little to no impact on society. There's 2 of you. 3. That's what he said. But think about the impact that you're going to have on your family. Think about the impact that you're going to have on this church. Think about the impact that you're going to have in your job and wherever else if you choose to just be cleansed and take off the old and put nothing new on. What impact will you have? What will you be teaching your children? What will you be teaching the people around you? And what impact will you make for the kingdom of God? Perna got up here and he talked about actively seeking a church. That wasn't just going to happen by sitting in his house waiting on it, but they cried out to God, God, we need this. We made a choice. And when they said, God, this is what we want, this is what we need, God answered. He answered because when David got a chance to say yes or no, When David was forced with a choice, am I going to invite one of my direct reports to church? He made a choice to do what HR would have told him not to do. He made a choice. When Destin is out on walks and he sees this Indian couple walking along, and instead of doing the smile and nod, he made a choice. Where would Perna and Dipti be were it not for them seeking, actively asking God for help, and two other people obeying God, making the choice to do something they might have, Destin probably wasn't uncomfortable. David was probably uncomfortable, the things that they're called to do. Where would they have been? And how many opportunities have you missed because you're just settled into, this is how I am. This is how I am. I'm just not good at stuff like that. It's not my gifting. How many opportunities have you missed? How much harder is your life? What damage have you done in your kids' view of the gospel and what it looks like to follow Jesus? Because you decided it was enough to take off the old and take a shower and just stay how you were. So, I want to call you to make a choice, to put on the clothes of righteousness. And you say, Ben, I'm going to try. I'll try. I want to do it. You're right. Of course you're right. You're always right. I know y'all say that a lot. I know you're right, and I want to do this, but I don't think I can. The good news is that if you will make the choice, God will make up the difference, which is a lot. That God doesn't want to leave you alone to put on these clothes by yourself, but wants to be actively involved in changing you. And that is next week. But for today, choose not to just be who you are, but to be humble, to be meek, to be loving, to be patient. Choose to be not who you were, but who you should be. Would you stand with me? Our Heavenly Father, we come before you right now, and I'm so grateful for your patience, that you are patient with us and kind, and that though we are like children who take a shower and put on the same dirty clothes, or like children who have been cleansed and have had the dirty clothes taken off, but don't want to put anything else back on. We just want to be how we are. I ask for your forgiveness, I ask for your mercy, and I ask for your patience. Lord, I ask that you would give us a desire to be like you, and that we would take those steps, that we would make those choices, and that we would become who it is you want us to be. I ask, Lord, if there's anyone here who's relied on taking off clothes and putting on new clothes to try to make them right with you, that they would see today that that's skipping the first step, and that they would trust in you and cry out to you for rescue. And I ask, Lord, that we would be a church that's compassionate and kind and loving, and that we would follow you, not just to go where you would have us to go, not just to accomplish what we would have us to accomplish, but to be who you would have us to be. It's in Jesus' name I pray these things, Lord.